cloudy morning here in my neck of the woods, which is 30 miles north of Washington, D.C. And I appreciate you all spending some time with me this morning to talk about teamwork and high reliability organizations. Just to give you, there we go. Just to give you a little bit more about me, I appreciate the introduction and certainly all the information about my past. I sit here in Columbia, Maryland. As Dr. Joffrey noted, I do have a long career here in terms of team training work specifically. The first 10 years or early in my career, I worked for the U.S. Navy, most notably working with the Navy back in the early 90s, focusing on how to enhance teamwork training of their naval air crews in different types of aircraft. I then spent a number of years, about a decade, working in the federal aviation as well as with commercial airlines and air traffic control. And then in the early 2000s, I took what I had learned in these other disciplines, and because of a lot of work now focused on healthcare, was able to spend the last 10, 12, 15 years focused on teams in the healthcare environment. And most notably, and I'll talk about this specifically because I think it's relevant and I hope you find it useful, and I would like everybody to leave with a parting gift, so to speak, in terms of this session. I'm going to talk a little bit about TeamSTEPPS, what it is, what's available to you. So consistent with the objectives of today, what I want to talk to you a little bit about is what constitutes a team, give you a little bit of background about that, how to improve team performance, how does teamwork relate to high reliability organizations, and what free resources are available, which you can take now, take in the next hour and start using in your companies or whatever situation that may be relevant for you. So what I like to generally do is, for those people who are often, if you're like me, you're doing work and other things, I try to get things down to a couple of slides for takeaways. And then when you have time, if you want to go back and take a look at this and dig a little deeper, I think regardless of where you are in the world, where you are today, I would say the vast majority of work today requires some sort of teamwork. Work is not performed by individuals. It's performed by groups of individuals working together to produce a product, to perform a task, or whatever the case may be. Now, in those unique organizations, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes about what constitutes a high reliability organization, teamwork is really a more critical component in those cases, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. The way to improve teamwork, hands down, if you look at all the literature, is through training, right? Training is what makes the difference in terms of actually presenting enhancing team performance, enhancing team outcomes and the like. And like I said here, TeamSTEPPS is a proven resource that can be used to enhance that performance, and we'll get to that at the end of the session. So for those of you who have email, people who barge into your office like I do, you can now at least know these are the quick things we're going to take away from this, and I hope for those others will find this valuable as we work through it. So let me give you just some basics, because I think this is important for framing the discussion and thinking about what we mean in terms of teams and team performance before we dig a little bit deeper. So what constitutes a team? And I think everybody can agree that a team consists of four basic characteristics, and the distinguishing characteristic we're going to talk about in the sense that there have to be two or more individuals. Generally, there are specific roles assigned to individual team members, and tasks are allocated appropriately within the team. There's some sort of common goal that the team is working on together to actually achieve. And the key distinguishing characteristic of teams versus groups is that there is some degree of interdependency among the tasks and the team members. In other words, in order to perform the work that needs to be done, people have to interact and coordinate to be successful in doing the job, performing the task, or whatever the case may be. So what is teamwork? Teamwork really takes place in the red box on the screen. Currently, it is that interaction and coordination to perform those interdependent tasks. What's going to define teamwork then are the inputs, right? Characteristics of the tasks themselves. How are they structured? How are they independent? How difficult are they? And so on. And then team member characteristics in terms of what knowledge, skills, and attitudes individuals bring to the actual team. So the combination of those individuals, the nature and type of work to be performed, create a situation that demands teamwork and particular types of teamwork depending on the nature of the task and so on. And the result of that interaction and coordination is going to be the outcomes or the products of team performance. So it could be improved productivity, it could be improved efficiency, and so on. So let's dissect that middle red box a little bit more in terms of how, at least from the researchers I've worked with and my colleagues over the year, we think about team process and the critical knowledge, skills, and attitudes team members bring to each team situation. So when we think about those team members, right, they're going to bring certain knowledge about the team. They're going to have some understanding about how teams are supposed to perform. They're going to bring a certain set of skills from working in past teams in terms of how they think they should interact and coordinate with others. And they're going to have feelings about working in a team in terms of, right, whether they think teamwork's a good idea. I suspect out of all these things, because I know we have a large international audience, I'm guessing that third bucket, the feelings or the affects, what you think about teamwork, is probably the thing that's going to vary most culturally depending on what your perceptions in your country is about teamwork. So when we think about the skills, if we look across all the literature, and this has been done a number of times in terms of research trying to summarize what are the core skills and behaviors that define teamwork, there are several, and you'll see these carried throughout the presentation. So team leadership, or the idea of leading teams, right? There's usually a leader. There's somebody who defines the plan. There's somebody who's going to assign tasks, roles, and responsibility. There's somebody who's going to be responsible overall for how the team works together, what the team's trying to achieve, and trying to continually improve the performance of the team. That's that leadership function. Obviously, there's going to be communication among the team members. Somehow, whether it's verbal communication or by other means now in terms of the different modes of communication that we have available to us, information is going to be exchanged between the members of the team in order to perform the task, interact, and coordinate activities. Now, here's a little bit of a different type of thing that I think is really important, and then the defining characteristic really of what makes teams better than individuals is that within the team, generally team members know what each other is supposed to do, what their roles and responsibilities are, and therefore they monitor other performers, the other performers in the team, right? I need to pay attention to how, if I'm working in an air traffic controller, how well is ground control taxiing the aircraft around the airport if I'm trying to manage departure control and I'm going to be sending those planes off for takeoff and trying to weave in planes landing in the middle of those departures. So monitoring the performance of my teammates is going to be critical. The final thing, which I think is what distinguishes teamwork, or why teams perform better than individuals, is this ability to back each other up, right? So if I know what the plan is through what the leader has defined, if I'm watching and know how my other team members are performing, if somebody gets buried with a bunch of workload and my workload is less, or there's some way to help them, right, I can come and back each other up. In fact, if you've ever flown into Washington National Airport here in DC, for the arrival and departure control, they have a two-person team working that particular position to make sure that they're cross-checking each other, that mutual performance monitoring occurs in case they need backup because of the heavy workload. So attitudes and knowledge are definitely important, and I'm just going to talk about three, and I've mentioned these a little bit. So one is this idea: team members need to trust each other. They need to have a sincere trust that they believe that their teammates will perform their roles and that they're focused on the goals of the team and not just the goals of any individual themselves. So there has to be some way to establish trust. Teams tend to function better when the people who are part of a team have a team orientation. That is, they believe in the importance of teamwork and they like working in teams, right? And we can always think about, and again, from my experience here in the United States, I always talk about a little example where my daughter was in 5th or 6th grade and they had to do their first school project. And of course, she got assigned with a couple other students who weren't particularly good students, right? So she had to bear the bulk of the work to do that school project. She kind of learned that maybe teamwork wasn't such a good thing, right? And those experiences can influence one team's orientation in terms of what you value about teamwork. The final thing, which is a little bit more of a fuzzy concept, but I think we can all agree, is this idea of shared mental models. So if I'm the leader and I'm defining what the goal is, maybe it's in a care team, and I'm defining a plan of care to deliver a baby, the nurses, the support staff all need to understand, or we have to have a shared understanding or shared mental model of what that plan of care is so we can have a successful delivery. This is where we tend to parse out how we think about how these knowledge, skills, and attitude competencies can be distributed among team members, and this will affect how you actually train or work with teams. So we think of 3 levels. One is that individual task level. So that gets back to the task characteristics and the team member characteristics in terms of their skills at performing a task, right? A nurse is part of a surgical team. His or her tasks are different than the surgeon or the anesthesiologist. Same with aviation, right? The flight crew, you would argue, is the entire team. The pilot and the co-pilot tasks are different from the flight attendants. Similar in air traffic control, where we have ground, we have departure, we have people qualified in different positions sometimes and the like. So each of those individuals have specific skills to perform those jobs that they bring to the team. The next level are those knowledge, skills, and attitudes that anybody brings to a team situation. So if you think about yourself and you think about your work day to day, you often work with a variety of teams, I am guessing, in most companies these days. And what you bring to each of those teams is your own knowledge about teamwork, your own skills that you developed in terms of actually working in a team, and your attitudes, as we talked about teams. Those competencies, right, are generalizable across teams. Now that's different than the next level, which are when we work in an intact team, or we always work with a same set of teammates, we develop a set of refined versions of team leadership, how we communicate, how we monitor and back each other up. In other words, in the highest level of teams, if you think about some of your elite sports teams that would be relevant to you, right? Players can function very effectively because they work so often with each other. They don't need to have those conversations anymore. They have a particular way of doing things, and everybody's very highly trained on how to function together as a team. You can think about the surgeon who always works with a nurse assistant who knows what instrument to hand the surgeon before he or she even asks for it, right? That's a very high, refined level of teamwork when people are always in the same teams together. So what do effective teams do? I think I've talked a little bit, so I'm not going to go over all this. I think I just mentioned number 2, right? They have people who can anticipate each other. They can, we mentioned this earlier, they can recognize and adjust their strategy under stress, right? So teams can adapt to changing situations. That's where that backup behavior comes in well. Here's something I didn't mention earlier. They can manage conflict. They can give each other feedback. They can keep their conflict focused on the work. They can figure out within the team how to enhance their performance. Communication, right? In refined teams, they communicate enough. They don't over-communicate. They don't under-communicate. They provide feedback, as I just mentioned, and they understand each other's roles. So that's a little bit of framing about teams and the basics. The key things you should take away where we're really targeting as you see this continues is this idea is there's a core set of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are fairly well defined in the literature as well as through research and testing that define teamwork. Area we tend to target in the work I do here is at that generalized set of competencies because we're generally working with teams that work in a variety of situations. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about here is how does that relate to high reliability organizations. So by definition, the key characteristics of high reliability organizations are that these organizations are involved in highly complex tasks. The consequences of error related to performing those tasks are significant, and why they're highly reliable is they make few mistakes over time. I think the easiest one to define here is aviation, in the sense if you think about the number of flights and the number of flights hours, how often, and it's so rare, right, that there is a catastrophic event related to an airplane or something happening. So here are some more defining detailed characteristics. I have 8 up here. HROs are organizations that demand to be high reliability, often have hyper complexity, right? We talked about that already. The work itself is tightly coupled, meaning that it's often interdependent. There are, because of the complexity, because of the interdependency, right, there are specific roles, and those roles are clearly differentiated. Within those subsets, there are many decision makers. Again, think about air traffic control. I'm probably going to stick with this example a little bit today. A plane is cleared to taxi from the ramp. That plane is then handed off to ground control, who taxis the aircraft around the taxiways to set them up for departure. That plane is then handed off to local control, who departs the aircraft while concurrently landing aircraft that they're giving to ground control on the ramp and so on. Once they depart the aircraft, they're handed off to a TRACON, which kind of handles an interim step that sets them up for center control to fly the main part of the route and back on the other end. That's a highly complex, tightly coupled, clear roles type of scenarios where you have multiple decision makers involved taking that airplane from whatever origination city to destination city. There's a high degree of accountability, right, if something were to happen, and those happenings obviously can vary, but on the severest end would be that the plane crashes or something tragic happens. There's frequent and immediate feedback regarding decisions. So if you think about all this information at busy times, or all these aircraft have to be organized in such a way that makes sense, there's immediate feedback if you don't organize them correctly and coordinate across the different functions. Time is compressed, right? We're trying to move this traffic in a timely manner, and the outcomes are synchronous. So you can see where teamwork is really, it's not that the only thing that's important in high reliability, but it's going to be an extremely important aspect of any type of organization where the tasks are complex and the consequences of error are great. And in fact, some of the specific characteristics of HROs are defining of teamwork, right? Hypercomplexity, complex tasks that need to be performed by teams or multi-team systems, teams of teams, tightly coupled in the sense that there's a lot of interdependence across individuals, across teams themselves. And that is, again, as we talked about in the original set of kind of theme in this presentation, is a defining characteristic of teamwork. Many decision makers and lots of feedback along the way about how the performance is working. So teams are in fact a key requirement of HROs. They're not the only requirement, but they're going to be critical to ensuring that the organization itself is highly reliable. So how do we enhance teamwork? If teams are going to be a critical aspect of work, if teamwork is important for proven results, error-free results in complex environments, how do we do that? And the main way we do that is through team training. There's been a lot of research looking at different strategies to produce effective teams. And the four that I'm going to mention, but I'm only going to focus on the last one, would be things that people have explored, and I cite a couple of articles here. So one thing might be, if we're trying to create great teams, we just select the right people, right? How do we pick people who are good at teamwork? And we talked about this already. Some people like to be in teams, some people don't like to be in teams, and maybe we could use that to guide ourselves in terms of thinking about the right people to place in teams versus not placing on teams. We can look at the work itself, and we can think about how the task and the work is constructed and modify that in order to enable the team or enable the people who are forced to be in the team to function more effectively. We can also give them tools or work aids to help them promote teamwork. One of the things, and we'll mention this later, that you can think about is in aviation, again, pilots have checklists, right? Those are tools or performance aids to help facilitate performing a task. Sometimes those performance aids actually distinguish pilot and co-pilot roles, so they help teamwork. Or we can train people. And the most effective way that the research shows, and I'm going to show you some data because obviously I'm an advocate and this should not surprise you, of course team training works, is training teams, and this is what I've been involved with in the military and the commercial airlines and healthcare and all sorts of different environments, seems to be the most effective way to enhance team performance. So I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about some research from my research background. In human factors, I believe the Human Factors Journal, and if anybody wants this reference, I can get it for them, and as well as some more recent ones. There was a meta-analysis published, I think it was in the January-February timeframe in 2008 by Eduardo Salas and his colleagues. And basically what the question that they were trying to summarize in this meta-analysis is whether team training worked. And you can see a list of the 300 empirical articles and how they were broken down here in their, over 30 years search of information on teamwork. They had in their database over 10,000 teams represented. What's interesting, I think, since this is now about 10 years ago, is the distribution, I'm guessing, of the teams and the focus has probably changed a little bit. And in fact, recently, Eduardo and his colleagues came out with an article in the Journal of Applied Psychology focused just on healthcare teams. And you can see in this particular iteration 10 years ago, there was only articles that captured about 180 plus healthcare teams, and the predominance was about this approximate 7,000 aviation teams. Over the last 10 years, focusing on teamwork in healthcare has become a major research focus. Just to continue here, you can see the types of information they were able to extract. Basically, they found, 41 studies that reported 84 effect sizes to do their analysis. They looked at some moderating factors in terms of how the training was delivered and what its content was. Team member stability, meaning did the training target intact teams or these generic skills that can be brought to any team? And then size of the team is some of the information reported in this paper. Basically, the punchline result, which I think is most important by far, is that team training was shown to have a significant effect on team outcomes. Most notably, and what you're trying to do in terms of team training is enhance that red box, if you remember, in terms of team processes. Team training produced a almost 20% improvement in team process. So that's a pretty significant amount of variance when you think about this kind of research that is done in terms of an overall improvement in something. So you're getting a lot of value out of team training should you implement a team training program to enhance teamwork depending on the needs of your organization. So let me just talk about a program that is very effective, has been well studied, and would argue does produce that kind of improvement. It's targeted for healthcare, but I'm going to make an argument to you that it could be generalized to any particular situation. So this is TeamSTEPPS. It actually was produced by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which is a federal health and human services agency here in the United States, with support from the Department of Defense, also the TRICARE management activity. So this is the healthcare arm of the Defense Department. To give you a little context for how this all emerged, and some of you may be familiar with, for those of you who are in the healthcare discipline, if you think about this timeline, there's a couple defining moments for us in the work that we've been doing. For those of you who are familiar, the Institute of Medicine in 1999 came up with published a report entitled "To Err is Human." One of the conclusions in that report is a major causal contributor to error in healthcare is failures in teamwork. And so this really started the ball rolling in terms of looking at teamwork in the context of health, the delivery care, and how care can be improved to deliver it effectively and improve patient safety. And so you can see in this time frame in the early 2000s, work started to emerge. In fact, in the Department of Defense, in the military healthcare system, there was a legislation in 2001 that required the implementation of some kind of team training in military health facilities, which really started this work. Our company in 2002 that I was affiliated with won a project to evaluate that training. That's why I've been involved with healthcare for about 12, 15 years now. And one of the outcomes of that was in 2005, the idea to develop this course called TeamSTEPPS that we ultimately named it, that would be a free public resource available to anybody who wanted to enhance team performance in the delivery of care in their healthcare organization. And once we developed it, we had to set up some sort of support around it. So in 2007, we launched a national implementation program where we set up training centers across the United States that people could come to. And we've had people come to these centers from all over the world, quite frankly. the original training we did, we had a team from Southwest Australia join us who have implemented TeamSTEPPS throughout that part of the world. And we've been running this training program now to give away this curriculum and help people with their team performance problems since 2007, since the past decade. More recently here in the States, with the implementation of things, you probably heard of Obamacare or the ACA, there's a lot of work focused on quality in that domain. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services actually launched a national campaign in 2011 to reduce harm to patients. So they identified 10 harms that are caused to patients through the delivery of care, and they enrolled close to 4,000 hospitals in an effort to mitigate those harms. Many of those hospitals actually use this teamwork curriculum to help them address that. To date, we've made tremendous improvements in terms of safety through a combination of these things in the delivery of care in the States. So TeamSTEPPS, the key thing I want you to take away from here, and I have the link so you can get everything, is this is free. It's available to anybody. I get requests from all over the world, quite frankly. I've seen parts of this. I actually saw one of our little pocket guides that I had a picture earlier that somebody sent me that was in Arabic. We give it away, so we don't always know who actually has access to it or who used it, but it's also completely customizable. And the content, I believe, is generic enough and customizable enough to apply to many team situations. In fact, much of the information that's in here came out of my early work and work I did with others from the Navy, from aviation, and healthcare has been evolved over time to drive what's in this curriculum. So it's not just for healthcare. It could be certainly adapted to many different team environments. So the way we run it here in the States, because we have funding to run this national implementation program, is basically like a course that people come to. It's a 2-day type of course. I'm going to go over the components. If you pull down the materials, this is how it's structured. It's a train-the-trainer model. And we've had requests from different parts of the world thinking about running their own training centers where they would set up and train others in their area. Again, it's customizable. There's 2 components that I'm going to go over in terms of what we talk about. One is the didactic information about what teamwork is. Some of that I've exposed you to. And then the second day, I think what's important in this is how am I going to use it, how I'm going to implement it. And it is really more about changing the way people do work and changing their behaviors. That's the hard part, right? I can teach anybody about teamwork. I've already taught you a little bit about this today. It's harder to get people to actually practice this in their organizations. People often know what to do, think it's a good idea to do it, but don't always actually do what they know to do and think it's a good idea to do. And that's the challenge, is in kind of the transfer, getting people to perform these skills in their environments. So this is the fundamentals of TeamSTEPPS, and I would think from our earlier slides you'd see some tie-in. The labels are a little bit different for whatever reason, but there's some clear tie-in in terms of the core things that we teach in terms of basics about teamwork, how to lead a team, how to monitor others, that's the situation monitoring, how to back each other up, which is mutual support, and how to communicate. And again, you see that tie-in to the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that are important in terms of team functioning. So if you work in teams that have a clear leader and define the plan, define the roles, define how to back each other up, and you know how to communicate, you're going to perform better. You're going to be able to adapt to changing situations. You're going to have a clear shared mental model of what you're trying to do, and you're probably going to enjoy that affect part, working in those kind of teams and like working in teams that are like that. In this kind of fundamentals first day, so we teach participants about the core of teamwork like we did earlier in this session. We teach them a series of tools, so that job aid component that can help facilitate teamwork. So we have a number of communication tools, and I'm going to show you a couple of these in a second. SBAR stands for Situation, Background, Assessment, and Recommendation. If you're in healthcare, you may have heard this already, but it's basically a way to communicate information in a structured way to somebody you're trying to get a decision from. Call out, check back. I'm going to show a couple of those in a second. Handoff is when I am transferring information from one person to another. Again, think about the number of times that plane gets handed off by air traffic control. Patients get handed off all the time. Information gets handed off all the time. Leading teams, right? Know the plan, which is briefing, share with everybody. If the plan changes, we get back together and huddle. And did the plan work, which is the debrief. How do I monitor each other? And then how do I back up each other in terms of giving feedback, being assertive and appropriately assertive. CUS stands for a little acronym about I'm concerned, I'm uncomfortable, this might be a safety issue. So this gives you an example of the type of tool you could develop for guiding briefs, and what we see is a care team huddled around the board, the leaders writing on the board and telling the rest of the team members what is the plan of care for these patients for the day. Similarly, in aviation, we have checklists. Now we have surgical checklists. I'm less familiar with some of the other industries, but many industries now have checklists. Many industries now have huddles. We need, if we're going to work together, we need to understand what the common goal of what we're trying to do in terms of our work. Checkback is a simple communication tool. Now, I don't know if everybody's familiar with Starbucks, but if you drive through here to order your coffee in the United States at a Starbucks or any kind of fast food or restaurant place, right, you present your order and the person taking the order clearly reads it back to you. If you think about aviation, every instruction has a checkback, right? If air traffic control clears you to depart, the pilots come back on and say, clear to depart and what heading they're going to fly in the light. Same kind of thing with healthcare. If I give an order for a particular med or a particular procedure, I want to know that that receiver understood what the information is. And you can think about multiple people working in a highly dynamic, intense trauma situation or resuscitation where that exchange of information and clarity is going to be critical. This is what we talk about with our participants on the second day. This is all about the change management work, right? Even though I teach you these tools, even though I teach you these skills, it doesn't mean that you're going to apply them into your work environment. So we spend a lot of time with our healthcare teams thinking about where do they want to start their work. And the important thing here is we need to be solving a problem or addressing a concern that is due to a lack of teamwork. And we work carefully through in terms of assessment, planning, actual implementation, which is the training, and then measuring and trying to value and reinforce these kinds of behaviors in the organization. It's all based on a organizational change model from John Cotter, who's at the Harvard Business School. These kinds of steps really are about, and I'm sure for anybody who's been involved in a changed effort are very familiar, right? You need some sort of sense of urgency. You need to develop a vision. You got to get buy-in. You got to have some short-term wins, and you got to keep pressing. You can't give up. This is our TeamSTEPPS. One time many years ago, somebody got the whole process onto one page. It walks through this step-by-step planning that we teach people to develop a plan for their implementation of team training, what they should expect the results are going to be, and how they're going to measure it. There's some evidence. There's more in terms of the meta-analysis. The one project, Capella et al. 2010, was some work I was involved in where we implemented TeamSTEPPS in our trauma resuscitation at a level 1 trauma center here in the greater metropolitan DC area. We found improvement in the actual coordination mechanisms, right? The leadership, monitoring, support, and communication. But we also found significant impact on outcomes in terms of these process measures. So time to CT scan, time to intubation, time to operating room. So for more information, here's the link. Like I said, there's tons of materials on this website. They are all freely available and all customizable to your needs. So let's wrap up as we come back full around. For those of you who have had interruptions or emails and the like, I think to go back to my takeaway measures, I hope I've accomplished this. Obviously, I think the complex nature of work now requires teamwork. I think teamwork has become more and more prevalent. Certainly technology is changing some of the way people communicate and some of the way things get done, but the core kinds of aspects of what we've talked about in terms of teams and team performance are very important. Teamwork is critical, it's a necessary but not the only component to produce high reliability. If you want to enhance teamwork, team training is the best way to go, and TeamSTEPPS is the free resource then to help you improve your team training. Even though designed for healthcare, I would argue it could be customized easily for other industries. So with that, I'm a minute over, but I'm going to stop here. And this is my contact information for anybody who would like to get additional information.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baker. And folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the chat box, question box available on your console, or equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available, so click on it if you want to speak directly to Dr. Baker. Well, let me go straight to the question box. There are a couple of them. The first one, is the importance of teamwork unique to HROs, or is it important for most organizations to be just successful?
I think it's important for most organizations. You know, it's really, HROs have a high demand for teamwork, but anywhere you have where you have task interdependencies and two or more people are involved in performing the task, it's going to be critical. Right now, in certain scenarios, unlike HROs, if the team fails, the consequences of error are not going to be as extreme as in the HRO case. So that's the biggest difference. But anytime you have interdependency, anytime you have more than one person involved in those interdependent tasks, teamwork is going to be important.
Thank you very much. We have another one. Do the team knowledge, skills, and attitudes generalize across cultures, or are they unique to the US?
Well, that's an interesting question, and so I think the skills do, and I've had that. It's interesting when 8-9 years ago, I worked with 5 hospitals in Taiwan, and I've kept in touch with them over the years. And I wondered because, you know, if you think about the Asian culture, it's very hierarchical, and we have some of the tools in there that are about assertiveness and about raising issues with those generalized. I think because they're put in the context of work, they would argue, though I've never witnessed this firsthand, that they do in fact generalize from the sense of we're changing the way that work gets done. I do believe that the materials and some of the information needs to be customized and consider the cultural nuances that are relevant. So I think the knowledge component, the idea that we need to have a shared understanding of what we're trying to do, and let's just keep this in healthcare, but even in aviation, we're trying to depart the aircraft successfully without an accident, or we're trying to deliver the baby. I think that holds true. I think the skills, leadership, monitoring, backup, and communication hold true. How they're implemented in terms of the tools, there might be some tweaking there. And then the big moderator may be about attitudes about teamwork. That could be cultural, obviously. If you think about the big cultural work, some societies are far more collectively oriented than others. The US would not be considered a culture that would embrace teamwork if you look at any Hofstede's research. So, you know, we've seen lots of implementations all over the world. I know when we worked with the folks from Australia initially, they did a lot of customizing. Some of that's in the scenarios and some of the real detailed content of the curriculum. But I'm going to argue, I think that the core components are cross-cultural.
Thank you very much. We have another one from Brother Muhammad Ashraf Shokar. The question is, up till what level the company culture will reflect on or drive the teamwork? And how to enhance teamwork if the company vision is not clear? We rely on the personal initiatives. So what would be your advice?
Yeah, that's where, you know, you can, you know, a lot of people think about training in a very simplistic way, right? The idea is I have an employee, they don't know how to work effectively in a team. I'm going to put them in team training, and then they're going to be effective. And the fact of the matter is this question suggests, there's a lot of dynamics in the organization that are going to need to be aligned to support the notion of team performance. So leadership buy-in is important, right? Across the organization. When you do training, usually there's a few key things that are important for training success. And there's some great reading about all these different factors in an organization that can influence it. But if you think about training, and I'm sure most people on this webinar have been in a training program, the first thing you need when you come out of training is an opportunity to use the skill that you learned in training. So opportunity to perform is going to be critical. The second thing that's going to be important, and I think happens more frequently than not, is in the sense that you need to have, when you do the learned skill, it needs to be valued and reinforced. I think what happens more often than not is that you've gone through training, you try out your training, and it's not valued and reinforced. So how leadership and other factors in the organization fit into that puzzle is really important, because there needs to be a collective agreement is that we're going to value and reinforce a different way of performing. That's why our whole day 2 in the TeamSTEPPS training program is really about making change in your organization. It's not more didactic information and tools about teamwork. That's really the hard work, right? The hard work is always, when I want to change the way things are done, is getting everybody on board to make sure that change, those behaviors and the like, are actually used by the organization and sustained by it. As my friend Eduardo says, who I mentioned a number of times, organizations get the behaviors they value and reinforce. So I will stop there.
All right, thank you very much. We have one last question. Are there any restrictions in using TeamSTEPPS?
No. The only restriction that I know of and I'm aware of is that the name TeamSTEPPS has been trademarked by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. So somebody could not set up a website, www.teamsteps.com, .org, whatever the case may be. You couldn't, as I always joke about, print a bunch of TeamSTEPPS t-shirts or anything like that. But if you will see, if you go to the link, you will find all the curriculum materials available for download. Now, I know internationally, because it's good for ARC, right, but it's not a requirement, they like to know about their international users, right? They get credit for deploying this stuff. And there may be some information, I'm not familiar with all the details on the website, Off the top of my head, that say you can register yourself or whatever. We also have just merged websites there. So if you're interested in just learning more, we had on a separate site, now I believe they're connected, a literature database of relevant things related to team training, teamwork, patient safety, and healthcare, which was an excellent resource for researchers. So like I said, none of it is, there's no restrictions other than the name. It's freely available. I wanted to leave you all with a parting gift. And you are free to look at it, download it, depending on the file type, like all the PowerPoints or all the slides and stuff are all in PowerPoint, so it's easily customizable. And if you were interested, you know, we also entertain international guests at these different training sessions that we run throughout the United States. So it's one of the funnest jobs I have because I get to talk about something and give it away and point people toward the resources, and I don't ever have to charge them for any of it, which is a great situation to be in because it's good. People, we estimate about 30+% of the healthcare industry here in the US has now had some involvement in TeamSTEPPS. And it's a good product and it's a free product, and I think it applies in a lot of situations.
Very much. We have just another question popped up. So from Jonathan, question is, can teams still be successful even in dysfunctional organizations? Do you have any tips on how to do this?
Well, that again, it's, you know, those are the challenges, right? And we work with a number of hospitals over time. That's where I've done a lot of work, where you have cultural demand that can be hard to overcome. That gets into kind of the slide that I had up earlier in terms of strategies for successful change. And for these things to get traction, sometimes you need some quick wins, right? And those quick wins can quickly gain momentum and be a catalyst for that kind of a change in a more dysfunctional situation. Now, that said, and this goes back to when we first started this work and I was working at a hospital in our pediatric group, sometimes you need some of the people that drive the dysfunction also to turn over to enable the opportunity for the change. So it's not a magic bullet. The hard work I would go back to is really in the strategy about how you implement, how you value reinforce, and how you get that snowball going. And it won't fix everything if you have staff that don't have the right skills, if you're understaffed. So the workload exceeds the number of people that you have. You can go through any number of problems that you can think about organizationally that a teamwork training program is going to enhance. What it targets is teaching people to work more effectively together. But there are certainly other things that could undermine that need to be in order first.
All right, thank you very much. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Dr. Baker, any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Well, I'll just thank everybody for joining today. I hope that everyone found this valuable and useful. I enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk about my work. I appreciate it. I want to thank the Mile Group for putting this together. It's very exciting for me to be able to reach out to everyone and talk a little bit about what we're doing here in the US related to teamwork, team training in high reliability organizations like aviation and healthcare. So I really appreciate everybody listening today.
And thank you very much indeed. I once again would like to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for your valuable time and delivering this very, very intriguing presentation. So thank you very much. once again, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. Please stay tuned to webinar.ma.org to learn about upcoming programs, webinars, and equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.